I'd say you better watch out for those bodies.
I used to be a cop for a few years. I wasn't exactly thrilled, but after doing my 4 years as a SEAL, I wasn't sure what other job I could do. The training was child's play compared to Bud's, and the job itself felt much safer to me than when I was in the Navy. It was also pretty boring most of the time, stopping people who went 10 miles over the speed limit, taking weed from kids, and eating fast food for almost every meal, which I hated. On top of that, I was quickly getting out of shape. Spending hours in a car and eating shit all day took a serious toll on my body. My strength faded, and my muscles shrunk considerably. I wasn't fat, but I was a shadow of my former self. One night I was just as bored as ever. I had just gotten my own squad car, and I hated it even more, as I didn't have a partner to talk with. I had gotten a call to go investigate an abandoned house. It was about 11:30 p.m. Despite not being the closest officer to it, I decided to take the call, and I drove over there looking for something interesting to do. The house was in a generally secluded place. Each house was a good distance from the next. It was unknown exactly why this house needed investigating, because the caller didn't elaborate much before hanging up. I was expecting either drugs or it just being nothing, but either way, I still drove up to it and proceeded to do my job. The house was surrounded by overgrown grass and weeds that were up to my waist and had grown across the walkway, completely covering the bottom of the house. Ivy, mold, and other weeds covered the rest of it. I turned on my flashlight and pushed my way through the weeds and up to the front door. I felt like I was going to fall through the rickety floorboards as I knocked on the door to see if anybody was inside. There was no answer as expected, and so I decided to force open the door. I slammed into it and broke the hinge. The door flew open. Upon walking in, I sensed the incredibly potent smell of urine and smoke. It was so strong I felt my eyes water, and I had to step back outside for a bit to catch my breath. Once I had caught my breath, I walked back in and shined my flashlight around the house. The smell was so hard to deal with, but I just had to push through it. In the initial living room I stepped in, it was fine. Obviously old and falling apart, but nothing I wouldn't expect. Going into the kitchen, however, revealed to me exactly what was going on here. Blood was all over the floors, in the sinks, and on the walls. A lone chair was in the middle of where the dining table would normally be, drenched in blood. I pulled out my gun and took the safety off before going further into the house. Some kind of torture had gone on here, not just murder. I saw knives, saws, drills, screwdrivers, and rope, all lined out in the corner, most of which were covered in blood as well. I noticed a trail of blood that led to the basement door. It was smeared in a way that indicated that someone who was bleeding profusely was dragged down into the basement. I called for backup, and then I raised my gun, opening the basement door and walking down the steps slowly. The blood was relatively new, as the steps were very slippery when I walked down. The basement was near pitch black, with no windows and no moonlight shining through them. I felt very isolated as I searched the room with my light. There was so much blood, and if I didn't have my light to see the color, I would have thought it was flooding. Upon inspecting the room, I saw bodies all around, stacked up against the wall, hanging from the ceiling by hooks, and tied to various chairs around the perimeter. I took a closer look at the bodies to see that every last one had been tortured. Some had excessive bleeding from their mouth and teeth that had been broken or smashed up into their own lips. Someone must have hit them in the mouth with a hammer. Others had drill holes throughout their body, while others had gouged out eyes, broken skulls, etc. In a back room, I found some more bodies. They were thin and pale. Urine and feces were everywhere, and some of the bodies had bite marks on them. Someone must have locked these people in there and starved them to death. Backup arrived shortly after, and after the bodies were removed, the house was torn down. The person or people behind everything was never found out, but as far as I know, that's where the story ends. I just thought I'd share it, as it was one of the more disturbing stories I have. Be careful out there. Sick people don't just live in poor countries where you won't ever set foot.
They are right in your backyard.